You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson, and of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I can't thank all of you enough for all your support. Our listeners, I mention this every week, and it's just true. Our listeners are growing each and every day, and it's because of you sharing some of our podcasts with friends and family, and we appreciate you doing that. And many of you listen to our show on either Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. Many of you go to our website at boomerstodayradio.com. So thank you for all that support. And I know why you're sharing it, because we have wonderful guests and great information. We're not going to disappoint you today. We have with us today Bradley Sherman, who I'm very excited to speak with. He's an expert on demographic change and how it disrupts social, cultural, political, and economic norms across the United States and around the world. His deep understanding of population shifts, coupled with his grasp of emerging trends, makes him authoritative voice into the future of everything in our aging world. He's the author of The Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny, and founder and CEO of the global research and advisory firm, The Super Age. He's written for Newsweek, been quoted by Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and USA Today. And just very excited to have him with us. Bradley, welcome to Boomers Today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I didn't, we had a chance to just chat briefly before we started this interview, and I didn't mention this to you, but I remember years ago, and I'm sure you've read the book, Alvin Toffler, what was it called that he first wrote on, future,
Population
trends.
Bomb, I believe.
Yeah, he wrote a bunch of books, and that, I have to say that's really got me so interested in this market, and that's why I have great respect of what you're doing, and that kind of got me going to think about getting into this segment of the industry and working with seniors, etc. So I'm really interested to learn more about your organization and what you're doing. So maybe you could give us a little. It was Future Shock. That's what it was. Alvin Toffler, Future Shock.
Future Shock. That's right.
Future Shock. Yeah, it just came to me.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the future that we're running into is pretty shocking as well. Right. We're running into a demographic reality that's been a long time coming. In fact, really since the start of the first industrial revolution in the 1760s, two trends have been hurtling towards each other. And one is that year on year, our birth rates decline, and year on year, our longevity increases on average. But most people don't quite understand this because there was a blip during the last century, which created the boomers, this massive group of people. But long term, we've been in population birth rate decline for some time. What this is doing right now, because of the speed in which it's happening, is that it's pushing up the average age of our population significantly. So by the end of this decade, the United States will be a super age country, meaning that at least 1 out of 5 people living here will be over the age of 65. That's a first for our history. But it's already happening in a third of the counties in this country and 5 of the states. So it's already arrived for some people here in the U.S. Right,
and yeah, we're seeing it. We're seeing it too. So, what are some of the, would you say, other key shifts in these changes that will affect, let's say, the boomer population and other segments as well?
Well, I think if you read the book, it's easy to think initially that this is a book about older people and aging. But in fact, this is a book about all of us and our collective future, because demographics are the one thing that ties us together. And shifts in population tend to have a ripple effect into sectors of society, the economy, culture, even politics that we might not necessarily be keenly aware of. Take, for example, what's happened following the pandemic, or frankly started in the middle of the pandemic, this great resignation. People think of the great resignation as just a large group of disaffected millennials getting mad at their bosses because they can't take a coffee break. But in reality, the great resignation was made possible because so many older people left work during the pandemic, either due to forced redundancy or retirement, an extra 1.5 million people. And Gen Z entered the workplace, and Gen Z is a sizably smaller generation than both the boomers and the millennials. So we've got a smaller number of people coming into the workforce and a large number of older workers exiting. It really sets up a scenario for disruption. And you can blame some of inflation, believe it or not, on too many people being out of work.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so this great resignation, maybe you might look at this as a silly question, but I got to ask, you think it's real? I mean, this great resignation, is it really happening?
The data proves that it's happened. We're averaging 4 million or so resignations a month in the country. We have one of the tightest labor markets in history occurring right now. And because of that, because of the tightness of the labor market, we are seeing an increase in salaries that is outpacing previous years. We're seeing companies scramble to recruit and retain talent through improvements to their compensation and benefit structures. In fact, I just spoke to about 30 of the top benefits officers just a few weeks ago in California, and they're struggling with how to figure this period out. The big surprise for a lot of folks is that some of the greatest people that can come to solve for the problem are actually the people they let go, older workers.
Right.
There's a large number of boomers that were made idle and don't necessarily want to be made idle during this new era. But they struggle sometimes to get back into the office place because we're set up to favor young people. So we're not necessarily looking for older, more experienced talent. We're still kind of tricked into that promise of youth.
Yeah. So the days of somebody turning 65, getting their watch, their gold watch, and going off into the sunset, are those days gone?
I don't know if those days really ever existed. I mean, they were certainly around for a certain class of the population. But the idea of retirement has been really not something that's been evenly distributed amongst the population. And I think that as our income inequality widened, as companies pulled back on their benefits and their salaries because of a glut of labor, that concept of retirement really got further and further out of reach for a larger and larger percent of the population. So now it's not unusual to see people, living in multi-generational homes where they're living with their adult children, or their adult children are living with them. Mm-hmm. We're moving back into an era, in some cases, where the family becomes much more central to the overall caretaking or caregiving to an individual who's in later life. But there is so much time between when you are supposed to exit work, based on norms, and when you actually need that care. So there's a lot of space for boomers in particular to have an outsized impact on the economy just by extending their working lives 5 or 10 years.
And really, from what, you would know better than I, but from what I've read, is that boomer generation quite a bit. It's not that they're not ready to retire financially. Maybe
No.
They're not ready to retire anyway. They want to continue to work. They don't know what they would do with themselves if they didn't work, but financially they're not ready. Is that correct?
Yeah. We do a really significant disservice to people in this country. We don't teach them about money at all. That's something you kind of have to learn on your own. So financial literacy is pretty poor on the whole. We also have this kind of insatiable optimism that we instill in people that makes them think that A, retirement is plausible, and B, retirement is possible with very little money. Um, Most people have a hard time understanding what their budget looks like for 2 months, much less 20 years or 30 years. So the average person really needs about $1 million to retire. The vast majority of this population doesn't have it, yet a majority of people believe that they're ready to retire or they can retire in comfort. It's really disconnected. I think if anybody is listening and they want to really think about what their future looks like and start kind of future proofing what they want to see in it, they really need to take a hard and true assessment of what their retirement packages look like. Do they have money put aside? Do they own a home? Do they have a 401k? What does Social Security really look like for them? Because Social Security gets a little bit smaller over time. It's not that bedrock that we would have expected just 15 or 20 years ago.
And I would think, and maybe we have, and I'm just unaware of it, but that there would be some new words for retirement. To me, retirement is you've stopped working, and now whatever, you're going to play more golf, you're going to become, start painting, you're going to take up an instrument, you're going to do some of the things maybe you wanted to do, but you're not working anymore. You're not even thinking about it. But I guess, and I'm just talking about in my sphere of people I know and friends, there's not that most people don't want to fully get out of work 100%. Some do, of course, but is there a term for that, or are we going to come up with a new term? Why, versus black and white, retired or not retired?
Yeah, there's a really fun term that's emerged maybe in the past year or so. It's called unretired or UnRetirement. And it's people who are maybe fall within those traditional retirement years, but aren't approaching retirement in the same way that their parents did. So they're still remaining connected to income earning work, but they're also very connected to their vocations as well, whether that be the church or the arts or what have you. But we are going to see a growing number of people working regardless that are past 65. In fact, just this past fall, the Bureau of Labor Statistics projected that by 2030, when we become a super age nation, we will see a near doubling of the workforce over the age of 75. That's pretty substantial. This is formal labor. Might not be full time, but it is formal labor. That's a significant jump. Interestingly enough, though, during the same period, we're actually going to see a contraction of workers under the age of 25 by about 7.5 or 8%. So the economy needs people to stay working longer. UnRetirement is a nice term for now, but it doesn't fully express this group of people that falls between traditional working years and full-time retirement. We call these folks within our work the middle plus or super agers, because those people that extend their working lives on average are healthier physically, mentally, emotionally, cognitively. All of these things are improved in addition to financial health just by extending work.
Yeah, and based upon what we were talking about at the beginning of our discussion, I would think that employers, if they're going to need people, that boomer generation, to stay working longer, okay, because of the need out there, that they would probably be more flexible with that person if they were working their 40-hour or 40-hour plus week, that maybe that person says, hey, I'll take a little less pay, but I want to continue to work, but maybe I work 3 days a week or whatever the case. Are you seeing a trend that way as well?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing businesses opening up their approach towards flexible work. That's just being driven by it being the number one thing that employees want above anything outside of salary and healthcare. Flexibility really has become a dominant request, a dominant trend. But not every industry can have that. Obviously, within certain industries, people may need to consider different types of work within that company. So we've seen, for example, factory workers who might not want to be on the floor 5 days a week moved into some type of office or oversight type work. Perhaps they get into a mentoring type program with a younger person, like an apprenticeship, and those tend to work very well too. But on the whole, businesses won't act until they feel the economic pinch. You know, business is not altruistic on the whole, so they're not going to hire an older worker because they feel good about it. They're going to hire an older worker because it makes sense to their bottom line. And in fact, we only really need to look overseas to see where this is happening in real time. And some of the best examples are the German automotive industry, where they've made multi-billion-dollar investments into their plants, where they actually build cars from BMW and Porsche and Mercedes to ensure that the lives of their employees can be extended, not indefinitely, obviously, but significantly. And with that extension, they're able to build then stronger and more resilient teams. And in fact, German research has proven that age diverse teams perform better than those that are not age diverse. So Germany's figured out the economic reasoning for this, the rationale for it, and now they're making significant capital improvements to tap into the opportunity of demographic change.
Very interesting. So Bradley, we're going to take a real quick break, I promise, just to recognize our sponsor. And we come back. I want you to, be able to share your information about Super Age, with our listeners, and we'll talk about some other things about home ownership and what's happening there, and maybe even talk about Social Security, what's happening there. So we'll be back in just a second. So do you know anybody who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, you can go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. We're back with Bradley Sherman, who's the founder of Super Age, and he's an author of the Super Age, and we'll talk more about that as well. And so Bradley, welcome back. And so maybe before we get into some of our questioning, how can people learn more about Super Age, learn more about getting your book, anything else that you'd like to share? It's commercial time, so go for it.
Well, you can find me at thesuperage.com, and you can find information on purchasing the book there as well. And of course, the types of consulting work that we do. You can find the book on Amazon, of course, Barnes & Noble, and your local retailers. But of course, on the site, you can take a deep look into how we're helping enterprises in the U.S. and around the world really tackle demographic change in a meaningful way. And the Great Resignation, which we were just talking about, has really been a primer for us to refocus our work around human resources, including older populations in these conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion. And then a new business line for us, which is inclusive design of the built environment, which we think is will be a real central tenet to this new era, that inclusion of all people is really the name of the game. And, I have to say, frankly, writing the book really opened my own eyes to where there were glaring holes within our society, especially around the aging of the population. And, so much of the work that we do is built around ADA when we think about inclusiveness. But the vast majority of ADA is really built around the wheelchair, and only 5% of people with disabilities have a wheelchair need. So our thinking is that we really want to help the world by fixing the built environment for the other 95% too. So we've got a pretty ambitious agenda here for now and into the future.
So you brought up something very interesting that I actually did not have on my list to ask you, but I'm going to ask you, and that has to do with kind of what companies, larger corporations, even smaller, whose workforce, the statistics show that absenteeism and presenteeism is on the rise due to, the employees of those companies dealing with a parent or other loved one who needs care. And what do you see there? What do you see shifting there in your discussions with these companies and human resources areas?
Well, I think that companies have long considered that their working age population was relatively healthy and didn't necessarily need a lot of support outside of traditional benefits like maternal or paternal leave. What we've seen, though, certainly in the past 20 years, is this real emergence of the need for caregiving and the ability to be a caregiver for a loved one, a parent or a grandparent, because there's an explosion of younger caregivers too. So the ability just to take some pressure off the employees so that they feel that they have the license to take mom or dad or grandma or grandpa to medical appointments really helps engender, I think, a stronger culture, certainly loyalty amongst employees. But, like anything, your employees have a breaking point, and caregiving is a really difficult task for most people. But the alternative is impossible, really, to hire somebody private to care for a loved one. So companies are trying, I think, to really thread the needle on this. It is a novel benefit for the most part, caregiving leave. But it falls into this idea of flexibility and maternal or paternal leave. We can do it if we want to. And for many companies, they will need to at the end of the day if they hope to retain their middle-aged employees, some of their highest performers.
Right. Well, I think that it's not just caregiver leave. What we've seen is that, when somebody is dealing with this with a parent or other loved one, it might be only once, maybe twice in a lifetime. So when they're confronted with it, they don't know the first thing to do, and it takes a lot of time. So I think what we're hearing, you tell me if you agree, but what we're hearing from companies is we don't want them to take that time off. Maybe we could get them advice so they don't have to take as much time off and leave it to a professional to help.
Yeah, I mean, obviously companies don't want to lose their employees' productivity. They don't want the productivity to be impacted. So of course they want to keep them, working as much as they can. But the alternative of loss in a period where we have such an incredibly tight labor market really is untenable. And, I would have said even pre-pandemic we're probably not going to see a lot of movement around benefits because there is still this glut of labor. But because of the tightening of the labor market during the pandemic, again, excess retirements and fewer younger people coming in, there really is a motivation for a number of different businesses and a number of different industries to start offering their employees more, because they find that, when these benefits are offered, people are more loyal, they stay in positions for longer periods of time, they're generally happier, they're providing more and more to the overall goodness of the organization and the success of the organization. Not doing this can really be a critical error for businesses, because if they don't and somebody is overwhelmed, they're going to choose taking care of the family member over working for a job that doesn't support them. And I think we've seen this now, long-term data, women in particular who, this caregiving responsibility tends to fall on disproportionately. Women leave the workforce because of it. Just like women leave the workforce because there isn't a greater good enough maternity benefit or childcare benefit. So if businesses really want to keep these folks, they're going to need to be pretty creative about how they approach them. Yeah. And flexibility is one way you can solve for a lot of that. But I agree with you. If you have a caregiving need, that first immediate response is, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because the information that's out there is scattered far and wide. And businesses could do more getting information into the hands of their employees.
Right. Oh, very interesting. Good. So, I could talk to you all day about this subject matter, and I know we don't have the time. I don't know if you have the time, but maybe we could just finish up with just kind of your thoughts on kind of what the future looks like. Any words of wisdom that you may have for our listeners?
Well, I finished the book with saying the future may be gray, but it's incredibly bright. I think that we're in a period of really disruptive demographic change. And the pandemic did nothing to slow things down. In fact, it sped up many of the things that prognosticators like myself were expecting in 2030 or maybe 2034, where the number of 65 and overs will outnumber those under 18 for the first time in history. We've been thinking through the lens of kind of a slow, deliberate change, and we were really just shocked by the speed at which it hit us during the pandemic. So it is going to be a bumpy ride, but I think that as more and more people consider what their future looks like and how to guard against disruption in their own lives, they should be thinking about extending work. Don't leave your job at 65 if you don't have to. Stay in it, stay connected as long as possible. 2, building relevancy and resiliency is an important skill throughout life. Don't stop as you near those retirement years, or what are defined as traditional retirement years. And the third piece is, really think about the space in which you live. Are you utilizing your home in the right way? Are you considering it as a possible line of income, either through house sharing or Airbnb or the like? And have you really considered future-proofing your home? And, those are simple innovations or interventions you can make that make places like your bathroom or your kitchen or your garden or your stairs a lot safer for you now, but also in the future.
Great. Braley Sherman, thank you so much for joining us. You're going to check it out, thesuperage.com, and pick up his book. Great information. Thank you for joining us, Braley. Really appreciate it.
It's been great being here. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody. Please be safe. We'll talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.